That boarding pass never belonged to you. The words sliced through the busy terminal with enough confidence to make nearby conversations disappear. Rolling suitcases slowed. Coffee cups paused halfway to waiting lips. At Gate B14 of Chicago O'Hare International Airport, dozens of travelers turned toward the boarding counter, expecting to witness another impatient passenger arguing over a delayed flight. Instead, they found a woman who looked remarkably calm. Monica Reynolds, a 44-year-old black CEO, stood quietly before the boarding podium wearing dark jeans, white sneakers, and a simple navy sweater beneath a tailored burgundy coat that rested neatly over one arm. Her appearance reflected effortless confidence rather than obvious wealth. Nothing about her clothing suggested she helped lead one of the country's fastest-growing aviation technology companies. To everyone watching, she looked like an ordinary passenger trying to reach Los Angeles before sunset. Karen Whitmore, the gate agent behind the podium, looked Monica up and down one more time before glancing at the boarding pass in her hand. Her expression tightened as though every second confirmed a conclusion she had already decided to believe. "Are you absolutely sure this is yours?" she asked, loud enough for the people nearest the boarding lane to hear. Monica answered with the same steady voice she used during board meetings worth hundreds of millions of dollars. "Yes, it has my name on it." Karen checked the screen again, frowned, then looked back at Monica with visible disbelief. The hesitation lasted only a heartbeat before she made a decision that instantly changed the atmosphere around the gate. Without asking another question or calling a supervisor, she gripped the boarding pass with both hands and tore it cleanly down the middle. The sharp rip echoed across the waiting area. Several passengers gasped. A businessman slowly lowered his laptop. An elderly couple exchanged puzzled glances. A young girl looked up at her father and whispered, "Why did she do that?" Monica watched the two pieces fall toward the polished floor. She neither protested nor reached for them. She simply followed them with her eyes as though memorizing the moment. Karen mistook that silence for surrender. She lifted her chin. "That seat belongs to the actual passenger," she announced confidently. "Please step away from the boarding lane." Monica bent down, picked up one half of the torn boarding pass, folded it once, and slipped it into her pocket without saying a word. The gesture seemed almost too composed, confusing several people who expected anger or embarrassment. Outside the massive terminal windows, aircraft taxied beneath the late afternoon sun while baggage vehicles crossed the ramp in organized lines. Inside, curiosity spread from row to row. Some travelers assumed Karen must have uncovered fraud. Others quietly wondered why no one had verified anything before destroying the document. Near the charging station, a woman frowned and whispered to her husband, "Something doesn't feel right." He nodded but remained silent. Karen continued typing confidently into her computer, convinced the matter had ended. Monica remained exactly where she was, standing tall with relaxed shoulders and an unreadable expression. Years of walking into rooms where people underestimated her had taught her that the loudest voice rarely belonged to the strongest person. She glanced briefly toward the runway, checked the time on her phone, then slipped it back into her pocket. Her flight still showed on schedule. Her heartbeat never changed. Her breathing remained slow. Around her, whispers grew louder as more people began watching the unusual silence instead of the torn ticket. A little boy finally tugged on his mother's sleeve. "Mom," he asked softly, "if she did something wrong, why doesn't she look scared?" His mother looked at Monica for several seconds before answering. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "the calmest person knows something everyone else hasn't learned yet." Monica heard every word. So did Karen. The gate agent dismissed the comment with a confident smile and returned to preparing the boarding process, unaware that somewhere inside the terminal, someone had already been notified that Gate B14 had become the most important stop in the entire airport. Monica Reynolds remained exactly where she was while the atmosphere around Gate B14 continued to shift. Most people expected some kind of reaction, an argument, a complaint, a demand to speak with a supervisor. Instead, she calmly adjusted the strap of her carry-on and glanced toward the large windows overlooking the runway. The composure seemed to confuse people more than any confrontation would have. Karen Whitmore noticed it too. She leaned slightly against the boarding podium, watching Monica with the confidence of someone who believed the situation had already been settled. What nobody in the terminal understood was that Monica had spent most of her professional life walking into rooms where people underestimated her. She had learned years ago that the loudest person in the room was rarely the most powerful. A group of passengers sitting near the gate exchanged quiet observations. One man in a sports jacket shook his head. "If the boarding pass was not real, why is she still standing here?" he asked. His companion shrugged. Another traveler whispered that Karen probably knew something the rest of them did not. Assumptions formed quickly. They always did. Monica had seen it happen hundreds of times. She slowly pulled out her phone and checked the time. Her flight was still scheduled to depart on time. Around her, announcements echoed through the terminal. Families rolled suitcases past neighboring gates. Coffee cups changed hands. Life continued as if nothing unusual had happened. Yet inside Gate B14, attention kept drifting back toward the woman standing alone near the boarding lane. Karen finally broke the silence. "You should probably move away from the boarding area," she said. "We need to prepare for priority passengers." Monica looked at her. "I understand." That was all she said. No frustration. No sarcasm. Just 4 words delivered with complete calm. The response somehow irritated Karen even more. Several rows back sat a young flight attendant named Emily Carter, waiting to join the crew after another assignment had ended. She had not intended to pay attention to the situation, but something about it continued pulling her focus away from the tablet resting on her lap. She remembered seeing passenger information earlier that afternoon while reviewing updated manifests. A name had stood out: Monica Reynolds. The memory lingered in the back of her mind like a song she could not quite identify. Emily frowned and opened an airline application on her device. She did not know exactly what she was looking for. She only knew something felt off. Meanwhile, Monica remained motionless. The afternoon sunlight stretched across the polished terminal floor. Her reflection appeared faintly beneath her feet. To everyone else, she looked like a traveler who had lost an argument. In reality, she looked remarkably unconcerned for someone whose boarding pass had just been destroyed. The contrast was beginning to attract attention. A businessman who had been working on a presentation closed his laptop completely. A retired couple stopped discussing their vacation plans. Even the little boy who had spoken earlier kept glancing toward Monica every few seconds. The entire gate seemed suspended between curiosity and uncertainty. Karen continued typing into her system, convinced she was in control. Emily, however, stared at the screen in front of her as a small detail appeared that made her sit up straighter. Next to Monica Reynolds' name was a notation she had never seen attached to an ordinary passenger profile before. Suddenly, the situation at Gate B14 no longer looked routine. Emily Carter stared at the notation on her screen for several seconds before looking back toward Monica Reynolds. The small line of text was easy to miss, but once she saw it, she could not ignore it. Most passenger profiles contained routine information: loyalty status, seating preferences, special accommodations. This profile was different. The designation attached to Monica's name carried a level of internal visibility Emily had only encountered a handful of times during her career. Her pulse quickened. Across the gate area, Karen Whitmore remained completely unaware. She continued moving through boarding preparations with the confidence of someone who believed every decision she had made would be supported. The contrast between the two women was becoming impossible to miss. Karen looked increasingly determined. Monica looked increasingly unbothered. A nearby traveler finally stood and approached the boarding desk. "Excuse me," he said carefully. "If there is a misunderstanding, maybe someone should double-check the reservation." Karen barely looked up. "The situation has already been reviewed." The answer sounded rehearsed. The traveler returned to his seat unconvinced. More passengers began paying attention. What started as curiosity was slowly becoming concern. Emily rose from her chair and walked toward a nearby terminal station reserved for airline personnel. She entered Monica's name again. The same notation appeared. Then another screen opened automatically. Emily blinked. That had never happened before. The access level associated with the profile exceeded anything she expected. She glanced toward Monica again. The woman stood quietly near the window, watching aircraft taxi in the distance. Sunlight reflected across the glass, outlining her silhouette against the bright afternoon sky. She looked less like a stranded passenger and more like someone waiting for a meeting to begin. Karen noticed Emily approaching and immediately frowned. Do you need something? She asked. Emily hesitated. I was reviewing passenger records. Karen crossed her arms. Then you should return to your assigned duties. The response drew several glances from nearby passengers. Emily lowered her voice. I think there may be information worth checking. Karen's expression hardened. The matter is closed. Those 5 words landed heavily. The gate area seemed quieter afterward. Even people pretending not to listen were listening. Monica remained silent. She neither defended herself nor challenged Karen. That silence was becoming a force of its own. The less Monica said, the more people questioned what had happened. A woman seated near the charging station finally shook her head. If she was really wrong, why does nobody seem able to explain it clearly? The question lingered in the air. Nobody answered. Karen returned her attention to the boarding system, but her movements had become sharper, faster, less relaxed. Confidence was beginning to share space with irritation. Emily, meanwhile, could not let the matter go. She opened one final screen. This time a message appeared requesting managerial verification before profile details could be displayed. Emily leaned back slightly. Her stomach tightened. Whatever Monica Reynolds was connected to, it was far beyond an ordinary passenger record. Across the terminal, boarding announcements echoed from neighboring gates. Travelers lined up. Flight crews passed through the concourse. Yet, Gate B14 felt increasingly disconnected from the rest of the airport. It felt like a stage moments before a curtain rises. Monica checked the time once more, slipped her phone into her pocket, and calmly looked toward the main terminal corridor. Something about her expression changed. It was subtle, almost invisible, but Emily noticed it immediately. Monica was no longer waiting to see what would happen. She looked like someone who already knew. Emily Carter could not ignore the feeling anymore. Every instinct she had developed working around airline operations told her that something was wrong. Not unusual. Wrong. She glanced once more at the restricted notation attached to Monica Reynolds' profile and then looked toward the boarding desk, where Karen Whitmore continued preparing for departure as if nothing significant had happened. The disconnect was becoming impossible to reconcile. Emily stepped closer. Karen, she said quietly, I really think we should review this passenger record one more time. Karen did not even look up at first. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with quick, irritated taps. There is nothing left to review. Emily hesitated. Several nearby passengers immediately focused on the conversation. The profile has executive-level restrictions attached to it. That finally got Karen's attention. She lifted her head slowly. And Emily blinked. And that is not normal. Karen leaned back in her chair. Neither is someone showing up with documentation that cannot be properly verified. The answer sounded firm, but it lacked the certainty it had carried earlier. People noticed. A businessman near the front row folded his arms. A woman holding a coffee cup stopped halfway through a sip. The gate area felt smaller now, as though everyone had unconsciously moved closer to the center of the story. Monica remained standing near the window, calm, patient, unmoved. The afternoon sun painted long reflections across the polished floor around her feet. Emily lowered her voice further. I am serious. The system is limiting access to her information. Karen laughed once, short and dismissive. You are reading too much into a computer screen. Emily looked back toward Monica. The woman showed no signs of anxiety, no signs of panic, no signs of someone worried about missing a flight. In fact, Monica looked more relaxed than anyone else in the terminal. That realization made Emily even more uneasy. People who were losing did not usually look that comfortable. A few seats away, the little boy who had spoken earlier looked toward Monica again. She still looks nice, he whispered to his mother. The mother smiled faintly but did not answer. She seemed unsure what to think anymore. Karen suddenly stood and addressed the waiting passengers. Boarding will begin shortly. Thank you for your patience. The announcement was clearly intended to move attention away from the situation. It failed. Nobody was talking about boarding anymore. They were talking about Monica Reynolds. Emily took a breath and made a decision. She opened the system one final time and entered additional authorization credentials. The screen refreshed. New information appeared. Her eyes widened immediately, not because she could see everything. She still could not, but because of who had authorized the restrictions attached to the profile. Emily had seen the name before, only in executive communications, only at the highest levels of the company. Her heartbeat accelerated. She looked up toward Monica, just as Monica turned away from the window. For the first time since the confrontation began, their eyes met. Monica did not smile. She did not nod. Yet something passed silently between them. Understanding. Emily suddenly realized that the woman everyone believed was powerless might actually be the most important person at Gate B14. And judging by the calm certainty in Monica's expression, she knew something else too. Whatever was coming next had already been set in motion. The atmosphere at Gate B14 had changed completely. What began as a routine boarding process now felt like a room holding its breath. Emily Carter stood frozen beside the terminal station, staring at information she was not supposed to see. Across from her, Karen Whitmore continued acting as though she controlled the situation, but the confidence in her posture was beginning to crack. She could feel attention shifting away from her authority and toward the quiet woman she had dismissed. That realization seemed to make her even more determined. "This discussion is over," Karen announced loudly. "We have passengers waiting to board." Her voice carried through the gate area. Several people exchanged looks. Nobody moved. Nobody lined up. Monica Reynolds remained exactly where she was. Calm, patient, unshaken. The more pressure Karen applied, the more composed Monica appeared. It was like watching wind push against a mountain. Karen stepped away from the podium and pointed toward a seating area farther from the boarding lane. "You need to wait over there until this matter is resolved." The request was not aggressive. Yet something about the tone caused discomfort to ripple through the crowd. A woman near the front row frowned. A businessman shook his head quietly. Even people who had initially supported Karen were beginning to question what they were seeing. Monica glanced toward the seating area and then back toward Karen. "I am comfortable where I am," she said. Her voice remained soft, respectful, controlled. The response seemed to irritate Karen more than any argument could have. "You are delaying operations," Karen replied. Monica simply nodded once. Then she looked toward the giant windows overlooking the runway. Beyond the glass, an aircraft rolled slowly toward departure, and for a heartbeat, she was no longer standing at Gate B14. She was 23 again, wearing her first business suit, holding a boarding pass with the same quiet confidence. Another gate agent had looked at her, then at the ticket, before asking twice if she was standing in the wrong line. The words had stung, but they had also taught her something she never forgot. Never waste energy proving you belong. Let your work arrive before your words do. The memory vanished as quickly as it appeared. Monica looked once at the torn boarding pass in her hand, took one slow breath, and returned her attention to the present. Her expression never changed, but the promise she had made years earlier remained unbroken. Across the gate, Emily could sense the situation moving toward a point of no return. "Karen," she said carefully, "I really think management should review this before we continue." Karen turned sharply. "Management does not need to review anything." Several passengers visibly reacted to the statement. It sounded less like confidence now and more like resistance. The little boy who had spoken earlier looked up at his mother again. "Why is everybody upset?" he asked. His mother sighed softly. "Because sometimes people decide what they believe before they know the whole story." Monica heard those words. So did several nearby travelers. A strange silence followed. Monica slowly slipped her hand into her coat pocket and looked around the gate one more time. She noticed Emily's worried expression, the uneasy passengers, and Karen still convinced she controlled the moment. For an instant she considered ending the misunderstanding herself. Just one sentence would do it. Instead, she quietly dismissed the thought. Respect gained through explanation disappears quickly. Respect revealed by truth lasts much longer. She unlocked her phone, selected a familiar contact, and raised it to her ear. "Good afternoon," she said with the same steady voice she had carried all afternoon. "Would you mind coming to Gate B14? I believe your team should see something firsthand." She listened briefly before smiling. "Thank you. I'll be right here." Monica slipped the phone back into her pocket without another word. She offered no warning, no dramatic announcement, and no attempt to change anyone's opinion. Yet the atmosphere around the gate shifted once again. For the first time since the confrontation began, Karen Whitmore felt a question growing inside her that she could no longer answer. The call lasted less than 10 seconds, yet its effect lingered across Gate B14 long after Monica Reynolds slipped her phone back into her pocket. Nobody knew who she had contacted. Nobody knew why her confidence seemed untouched by everything that had happened. But people could feel the shift. It was subtle at first, like the change in air pressure before a storm arrives. Karen Whitmore returned to her computer terminal and tried to focus on boarding preparations. The problem was that she could no longer ignore the growing attention surrounding the situation. Passengers who had been checking emails were now watching her. Travelers who had been scrolling through their phones were now whispering to one another. The gate area had stopped functioning like a waiting room and started functioning like an audience. Karen forced a smile and made another announcement about boarding procedures. The words sounded normal. The atmosphere did not. Emily Carter remained near the employee station, reviewing the restricted profile information again and again. Every path led to the same conclusion. Someone extremely important inside the company had personally authorized the designation attached to Monica Reynolds. Emily had worked for the airline long enough to understand what that meant. She also understood something else. If Karen had made a mistake, it was no longer a small one. Across the seating area, passengers began forming their own theories. A businessman suggested Monica might be a corporate attorney. Another traveler guessed she was a government official. A woman near the charging station believed Monica was probably a major investor. Nobody guessed the truth. Monica stood quietly near the window, watching an arriving aircraft roll toward a neighboring gate. Her reflection shimmered against the glass. She looked composed, almost thoughtful. The calmness seemed impossible given the circumstances. Karen finally stepped away from the podium again. "Who exactly did you call?" she asked. Monica looked at her. "Someone who asked me to wait." Karen folded her arms. "This is still an airport, not a private meeting room." Monica nodded slightly. "I am aware." The answer frustrated Karen because it offered nothing to challenge. Monica never argued, never raised her voice, never gave Karen a target. The imbalance was becoming increasingly visible. A few passengers exchanged knowing looks. One elderly man quietly remarked that confident people rarely needed to explain themselves. His wife nodded in agreement. Emily glanced toward the main terminal corridor. Something caught her attention. Several airport employees had suddenly become unusually alert. Heads turned. Radios crackled softly. A supervisor appeared from around a corner and immediately began walking with purpose toward the gate area. Then another joined him. The movement was small enough that most passengers did not notice. Emily did. Her stomach tightened. Monica noticed it too. For the first time all afternoon, the faintest hint of a smile touched the corner of her mouth before disappearing again. Karen remained focused on her computer screen, unaware of what was developing beyond the gate entrance. The little boy in the front row pointed toward the corridor. "Mom," he whispered, "why are all those people coming this way?" His mother followed his gaze and sat up straighter. More employees were approaching now. Managers, supervisors, people who rarely appeared together on the terminal floor. The conversations around Gate B14 gradually faded. One by one, passengers turned toward the corridor. The approaching group continued forward with steady purpose. And at the center of that group walked a distinguished older man whose arrival caused several airline employees nearby to straighten immediately the moment they recognized him. The quiet conversations around Gate B14 disappeared the instant a group of senior executives entered the concourse. Their pace was steady, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. Airline supervisors who had been speaking casually only moments earlier immediately straightened their posture. A regional operations manager stepped aside without being asked. Employees at neighboring gates paused what they were doing and instinctively looked in the same direction. At the center of the group walked Richard Hawthorne, chairman of the airline. His silver hair was neatly groomed, his navy suit perfectly tailored, and his calm expression carried the kind of authority that never needed to announce itself. Karen Whitmore noticed the reaction before she recognized the man. Her confident smile disappeared. She quickly adjusted her blazer and stepped away from the boarding podium, expecting to greet an unexpected executive visit. "Mr. Hawthorne," she began politely, "welcome to Gate B14. Richard did not respond. He continued walking without slowing, his eyes moving past Karen as though she were no longer the center of the moment. They settled on Monica Reynolds. For the first time since the confrontation began, the slightest smile touched Monica's face before her familiar composure returned. Richard stopped in front of her and extended his hand warmly. "Monica," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent gate, "I am sincerely sorry I kept you waiting." Complete silence followed. The businessman who had questioned the situation lowered his head in disbelief. The elderly couple exchanged stunned looks. Emily Carter felt every suspicion she had carried throughout the afternoon become reality. Monica accepted Richard's handshake with quiet confidence. "Thank you for coming," she replied. "I appreciate it." Richard smiled faintly. "After receiving your call, there was nowhere more important for me to be." Karen felt the color drain from her face. She looked from Richard to Monica, unable to understand what she had missed. Richard finally turned toward her. His expression remained professional, but the warmth had vanished. Before speaking, his eyes noticed the torn boarding pass still resting in Monica's hand. He reached for it gently. Monica handed him the folded pieces without a word. Richard unfolded the damaged document slowly, studying the clean tear across the middle. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. When he looked back up, disappointment had replaced every trace of his earlier smile. "Would someone explain?" he asked calmly, holding up the torn boarding pass for the surrounding managers to see. "Why one of our airline's most respected strategic partners was left standing at this gate without a valid boarding pass?" Nobody answered. Several executives exchanged uneasy glances. Karen opened her mouth, but found no words. Richard continued, his voice never rising. "For nearly 2 years, Monica Reynolds and her leadership team have helped modernize technology that improves the travel experience for millions of our passengers. Every executive sitting on our board knows exactly who she is." Audible gasps spread through the waiting area. The woman near the charging station covered her mouth. The little boy looked up at his mother with wide eyes. "Is she famous?" he whispered. His mother quietly replied, "No. She is someone who should have been treated with respect long before anyone recognized her." Richard looked back at Monica with genuine regret. "No guest who contributes to this company should ever have to call me from a boarding gate asking for help." Then he slowly looked around the silent terminal, still holding the torn boarding pass in his hand. "I believe," he said quietly, "we have a very serious conversation ahead of us." In that moment, every passenger at Gate B14 realized they had not been watching an ordinary disagreement. They had been watching assumptions collapse in front of the truth. Richard Hawthorne continued holding the torn boarding pass as silence settled over Gate B14. No one looked away. The damaged paper had become more than a ticket. It had become evidence. Richard slowly turned toward the boarding podium, his disappointment unmistakable despite the calmness in his voice. "I would appreciate a complete explanation," he said. Senior operations managers immediately opened their tablets, while regional supervisors accessed passenger records from different terminals. Karen Whitmore stood frozen behind the podium, searching for an explanation that no longer sounded convincing even in her own mind. "There appeared to be a verification issue," she said carefully. Richard nodded once before looking toward the nearest operations director. "Please verify every step." The executive reviewed the reservation history line by line before raising his head. "Ms. Reynolds' reservation is fully confirmed," he announced. "The ticket was issued through our corporate travel office. Online check-in was completed this morning. Her seat assignment has remained active the entire time. There were no fraud alerts, no security concerns, and no verification errors." A wave of whispers spread across the waiting area. The businessman who had questioned the situation earlier quietly shook his head. The elderly couple exchanged sympathetic smiles toward Monica. Richard remained composed. "Then I have another question," he said. "If everything was valid, why was her boarding pass destroyed?" Once again, nobody answered. The silence seemed heavier than before. Another executive stepped forward after reviewing the security logs. Terminal cameras confirmed the boarding pass was intentionally torn after being presented. The boarding system also shows the document had already been recognized as valid before it was destroyed. Several passengers reacted audibly. Emily Carter lowered her eyes for a brief moment, relieved that she had trusted her instincts instead of dismissing them. Karen's shoulders dropped slightly as the realization settled over her that every system record contradicted the decision she had made. Richard carefully folded the torn boarding pass and handed it to an operations manager before turning back toward Monica. "Ms. Reynolds," he said sincerely, "on behalf of everyone at this airline, I apologize for the way you were treated today." Monica accepted the apology with the same quiet dignity she had shown from the beginning. "Thank you," she replied. "Respect should never depend on recognition." Her answer lingered in the air. Several passengers looked at one another, recognizing how easily they had accepted assumptions only minutes earlier. A woman near the charging station quietly whispered, "She never had to prove who she was. We simply decided who we thought she was." The words spread through the crowd without anyone repeating them aloud. Richard looked toward the assembled managers. Every passenger deserves professionalism before assumptions. Our standards must be the same whether we recognize a name or not. The executives nodded in agreement. Moments later, the operations director approached Monica with a newly printed boarding pass. "Your original seat is ready whenever you are," he said respectfully. Monica accepted the replacement, thanked him with a polite smile, and glanced around the terminal one last time. The same people who had watched her with uncertainty now met her eyes with admiration instead. Karen finally looked up, but could not hold Monica's gaze. At that moment, she understood the greatest mistake she had made was never about a boarding pass. It was deciding someone did not belong before learning a single fact about the person standing in front of her. The energy inside Gate B14 felt completely different now. The tension that had dominated the afternoon was gone, replaced by a quiet awareness that everyone present had witnessed something important. Outside the terminal windows, aircraft continued arriving and departing according to schedule. Inside, however, time seemed to move more slowly. People were still processing what had happened. Richard Hawthorne remained near the boarding area speaking briefly with senior managers while final arrangements were made. Emily Carter stood off to the side, relieved that she had trusted her instincts. Several passengers offered her small smiles of appreciation. She returned them quietly. Karen Whitmore remained near the podium, no longer the center of authority she had appeared to be earlier. For the first time all day, she seemed to understand how quickly certainty can collapse when it is built on assumptions. Monica Reynolds looked around the gate one final time. The faces staring back at her were very different from the faces she had encountered an hour earlier. The suspicion was gone. The doubt was gone. What remained was reflection. The businessman who had questioned the situation at the beginning approached her carefully. "I am sorry for what happened," he said. Monica smiled politely. "Thank you." A woman near the charging station nodded in agreement. Others followed. Nobody was apologizing because Monica was important. They were apologizing because they now understood something deeper. The little boy stood beside his mother and looked up at Monica. "Are you the boss of something?" he asked. Several passengers laughed softly. Monica crouched slightly so she could speak at eye level. "I help lead a company," she answered. The boy nodded thoughtfully. "You stayed really calm." Monica smiled again. "Sometimes that is the best thing to do." His mother thanked her. The simple exchange seemed to capture the entire lesson of the afternoon. Richard approached once more carrying a professional but sincere expression. "Your flight is ready whenever you are." Monica accepted the invitation with a nod. Then she paused. She looked around the gate area one last time. The executives stopped talking. The passengers listened. Even the employees nearby seemed to know she was about to say something worth remembering. Monica's voice remained calm, just as it had been from the beginning. "The problem today was not a boarding pass," she said. "The problem was a decision made before the facts were known." Nobody spoke. She continued. "Too often people decide who belongs and who does not before they learn a single thing about the person standing in front of them." Several passengers nodded. Emily felt a chill run down her spine. Monica looked briefly toward the terminal windows where sunlight reflected across the glass. Respect should not depend on recognition. It should not depend on titles. It should not depend on clothing, status, or assumptions. It should be the starting point. The silence afterward felt powerful, not uncomfortable, meaningful. Richard lowered his head slightly in agreement. Around the gate, people absorbed every word. Monica then picked up her carry-on and started toward the boarding lane. This time nobody questioned her place there. Nobody doubted whether she belonged. As she reached the entrance, she paused for one final moment and looked back. "I did not raise my voice today," she said. "I raised the standard." Then she stepped forward and disappeared down the jet bridge. Behind her, Gate B14 remained unusually quiet. The passengers would eventually board. The flight would eventually depart. The airport would eventually return to normal. But for everyone who witnessed that afternoon, one lesson would stay with them long after the aircraft left the runway. The easiest mistake in the world is judging someone before learning their story. And sometimes the person you underestimate is the very person who changes the room without ever raising their voice.